Good morning, everyone. My name is Rich Sloma. Welcome to today's New York State Archives presentation of your role as State Agency Records Management Officer. Today's presenters are Vincent Commisso and Arthur Siegel. They are with our scheduling and state agency services staff here at the New York State Archives. The session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box to the right side of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And now I will turn it over to Vincent.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to all of you. I'm Vincent Commisso,
And I'm Arthur Siegel.
and we'll be your host in this conversation about your role as a State Agency Records Management Officer, otherwise known as an RMO.
We assume you're here either because you're looking for some sort of refresher or because you're new to the position and feel like you need guidance. Either way, the discussion today will help you understand what it is that you need to be doing as an RMO and why you need to be doing it. But first, just so you know where we're going, let's take a look at the agenda.
In the first part of our conversation, we'll focus on some basic information that you need to know as RMO, like your formal role and responsibilities.
Right. And also some of the challenges you're likely to face while tackling these responsibilities.
In the second part, we'll provide you with a framework for developing a deeper understanding of what the RMO position is and can be.
What do you mean by that?
Well, this won't be exactly a how-to guide or a manual on how to do your job. There are too many specific tasks to really give you a strict playbook here. All I meant was that we'll help you understand the RMO position is one that cultivates relationships within the agency and with the state archives, and show you how you can use those relationships to improve your records management program.
So, by seeing how all these parts connect with each other, it can make your job much easier.
Exactly. And finally, we'll end by offering some suggestions for how to customize this framework. That's really important to customize this framework to make it better fill your needs and obligations.
Okay, let's get to it then. Records Management Officer Basics.
While this part of our discussion may be familiar to many of you, it's a necessary stop along the way to developing that deeper understanding we just mentioned.
So if this is old hat to you, please don't mute the webinar. Just hang in there.
And if it is new to you, really try to listen and not distract yourself too much by furiously taking notes. Yes, we know that you're out there, you know who you are. Keep in mind, these slides will be available and you'll be able to listen to all of this again once it's up online in the very near future.
So let's go over some very basic terms first off to get us all on the same page. First, there's a record. A record is recorded information in any format and on any media created or received in the normal course of business as part of your work. That means it doesn't matter if it's printed on paper, in digital format, microfilm, stone tablets, or whatever. They all need to be maintained. Then there's records management. When we say records management, we mean the systematic control of records throughout their life cycle, that is, from creation to destruction or long-term retention. Understanding this concept is essential to being an RMO, but to really understand records management, you need to understand what being an RMO means.
And that brings us to our final term, which is, of course, Records Management Officer. An RMO is required in every state agency and is appointed and supported by the agency head or governing board. This is mandated by the Commissioner of Education's regulations, which can be found on the State Archives website.
But Vincent, who gets to be an RMO?
Well, we'll get to that a little later, Arthur, but for now I'll just say that ideally this would be a person with sufficient knowledge of records management issues, their own agency, and its functions.
Oh, and we shouldn't forget to mention, and can't stress enough, that if you're newly appointed and replacing an outgoing RMO, or if you're a current RMO and will soon be replaced for whatever reason, please contact the state archives and let us know about the change. But what about the RMO's duties? These are also spelled out in the Commissioner's regulations and include things like developing and reviewing records management policies and procedures, creating and maintaining a current records inventory, drafting proposed records retention and disposition schedules, overseeing records disposition, promoting and monitoring the records management program, and responding to records disasters.
Arthur, I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned a records inventory, but why does that matter?
Oh, well, I'm glad you asked that. An inventory is important for locating records, identifying problems, allocating resources, and developing a records management program plan. If you don't know what your agency holds, how will you know what you're working with? So it's critical you develop an inventory of agency records.
Well, I suppose you could have inherited an inventory from a previous RMO, right?
Well, that's true too. But either way, you need to make sure the inventory is up to date, which means periodic review and revision. And let me also add that there are a couple of other important reasons for an inventory. One of them is to assist in retention scheduling, which allows you to legally dispose of records. An inventory can help match schedule items to records and identify where scheduling gaps exist. But we'll return to retention schedules later in the discussion.
Okay, so what's the other reason then?
Well, the other is responding to records disasters. Sometimes a pipe bursts or a storm floods a record storage room, causing some of your records to become damaged. Actually, this sort of thing happens more often than you might think. And when disaster strikes, having an inventory can be critical in reconstructing information about the damaged records.
When it comes to disasters, the RMO will also need to act quickly to notify the state archives and take immediate steps to protect the records, though it seems like these things always happen on a Friday night.
Ain't that the truth?
It actually is. Several years ago, when I was working in a records management facility, when some staff spotted a leak coming from a pipe in our in-rack sprinkler system. It wasn't a major leak, no records were damaged, but it was a Friday night and the winter to boot, and I had to stay late to get the vendor to come down and repair it. We got lucky that time, but had there been a substantial leak, it would have been critical to respond immediately. If you do, you have a better chance to prevent mold growth and irreparable damage to your records. But if records are badly damaged or contaminated and pose a health risk, you can always request their early destruction. We do receive these requests periodically, so if there's a problem, contact us and we'll figure out if an early destruction makes sense. Now, something else is just occurring to me here.
What's that?
Returning back to that list of duties, I feel like they all sort of amount to a very formal, sort of legalistic conception of records management and what the RMO position is all about.
Well, yeah, that's true. But what's important to keep in mind is that this isn't the whole story. Sure, our regulations create the position and name its formal responsibilities, but the regulations don't really convey the essence of what it means to be an RMO. And that's what we're trying to do here today, convey that essence. See, being an RMO is about more than just knowing how to transfer records or name files well or conduct an inventory. While these things are critical, they're really just part of a bigger picture.
And these are also the sorts of things you can learn more about on our website and our publications and other webinars.
Right. So to get a better understanding, let's start taking a look at that bigger picture.
That picture starts with the basic idea that all of those specific tangible duties we talked about on the previous slide, those are all done for one main purpose: shepherding records through their life cycle.
Ah, the record's life cycle.
Yes, the record's life cycle. That's right. When we think about managing records, we think about them at different moments in their life, so to speak. So there's the moment when they're created, the time when they're active, which just means they're being used on a regular basis, the time when they become inactive and are rarely, if ever, used, and then the moment of final disposition.
Oh, that sounds dire.
Well, not necessarily, since final disposition can mean destroying records, of course, but can also mean transferring them to the state archives. At any rate, you as RMO are the shepherd, and like all good shepherds, you keep track of, protect, and escort your flock to where it needs to be. As RMO, you tend to your agency's records, making sure they get through their life cycle from creation to final disposition, unscathed and accounted for.
And why is this necessary? Because there are wolves out there, metaphorically speaking, in the form of lax record keeping practices, disasters, unauthorized destruction, etc., that could threaten your records over the course of their life cycle. It's your job to keep these wolves at bay.
Speaking of wolves, there are those that not only threaten the records themselves, but also those that could threaten the records management program and pose challenges to you as the RMO. For those of you who've been doing this for a little while now, or even for a longer time, of course you've probably encountered some of these particular wolves firsthand. The first of them is organizational placement. Every agency is different, different responsibilities, different functions, different organizational cultures, and even different attitudes toward records management. At the same time, The commissioner's regulations don't specify who within an agency is to be appointed RMO, only that an RMO be appointed.
So what you're saying is that anybody can be an RMO regardless of their job title or grade or where they reside in their agency's organizational structure?
That's exactly what I'm saying. In fact, we've seen RMOs range from grade 6 positions to agency head counsel and everything in between. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, this can sometimes create situations where the RMO isn't well positioned to perform some of the duties we discussed earlier, or at least not perform them very easily.
But while this can be a challenge, don't lose hope, for we'll see a little later that it also might be something you can overcome with a little bit of ingenuity and perseverance.
Another wolf you may have faced is lack of continuity.
Oh yeah, that's a particularly nasty one. Staff turnover can make it really difficult to maintain a continuous or even coherent records program. And when your agency head changes, priorities of your agency often change too. Regular training and good records management policies can help, but we also understand that regular turnover can seriously complicate what you're trying to accomplish.
Threats and challenges can also come from your agency size and geographic scope, as well as budget and staffing constraints. If you're in a particularly large agency, like, say, I don't know, the Department of Health or the Department of Transportation, you might have thousands of employees and dozens of offices across the state, making it difficult to coordinate records management activities.
Yeah, we actually hear about these problems a lot.
Of course, coping with tight or shrinking budgets is a common problem for anyone working in government, but this can be especially hard on records programs, which might be put on the back burner as priority is given to other issues.
And speaking of back burner, I would argue that the most insidious wolf is lack of interest.
Where are you going with that?
Well, if we're being completely honest, many people don't quite understand what records management is about and either lack the time at work to learn or are simply unwilling to take the time to learn for one reason or another.
So you're saying you get zero support.
Well, maybe not zero, but certainly not enough. And of course, that can feel a bit overwhelming. It can also create perhaps the most serious challenge to you as an RMO, dealing with the potential fallout from ill-conceived project ideas. Records management projects need to be thought through with care and can have disastrous results if they're designed without a basic understanding of records management issues. So before starting a project, especially one that'll involve considerable resources, it's critical to make sure it's appropriate.
Arthur, it sounds like you have something specific in mind. Would you care to share it with the audience?
As a matter of fact, I would. I'm thinking specifically here about scanning projects, though it needn't only be those. Scanning can be a very good idea, but under the wrong circumstances and done for the wrong reasons, it could be a very, very bad idea.
How so? I can't see the problem here. You take the paper, maybe remove a staple or two, and run the paper through the what's it called? The machine there.
Vincent, I believe the phrase you're looking for is document feeder.
That's right, document feeder. What's the big deal? Paper goes in, images come out, toss the paper, boom, done. Next project.
Yes, well, scanning is a big deal and quite a bit more involved than that. Setting aside the technical elements of digitization, people often treat scanning as a substitute for actual records management or as a catch-all solution to records management problems. But this is a serious and often costly mistake because if you scan without first addressing the underlying problems that encourage you to scan in the first place, you'll just carry those problems over to the digital records. And now they may be much more technically challenging to deal with. I understand the temptation to use scanning as a space and cost saving measure, but because of the space savings, it can be equally tempting to view the resulting scanned records as no longer in need of records management at all. And that would be disastrous since electronic records need to be managed every bit as much as the paper ones. Beyond that, there's also the hidden cost of scanning electronic records, particularly environmental and other resource costs.
So what you're saying is that someone needs to hit the brakes when records management projects like this are proposed. Not because they're necessarily bad, but because the right questions need to be asked and compelling answers given before starting them. If you don't do that, then all you are doing here is exchanging one set of problems for another. And as RMO, you're probably the person best positioned to see that and act on it. In fact, any records management projects should be discussed with you prior to implementation. But all this requires a certain level of commitment and a willingness to educate yourself on a broad range of issues.
That's exactly right.
This is probably feeling even more overwhelming than it already did. This is Monk's The Scream. And after Arthur's sunny contribution on the last slide, it's understandable if this is how you're feeling now as an RMO. It is a big job. We're not going to sugarcoat it. How are you supposed to perform your duties, shepherd your records through their life cycle, and come out in one piece given the challenges we've described?
I would also say it's definitely easier to do your job as RMO if records management is your sole responsibility, as opposed to being an add-on to your primary job, which happens more often than not.
Yes, the whole duties as assigned thing when you're hired. Yeah, it's kind of like treading water only to be handed an anvil. But if this is how you're feeling, keep the following things in mind as we go forward. First, nobody's doing this work perfectly because no one is perfectly positioned to do the work. Second, your job is not to know every technical detail of records management. Learning these will come with experience. In fact, learning on the job is how this thing works. Third, at the end of the day, it's called records management, not record solutions. The goal sometimes has to be to just make things less bad rather than optimal.
Oh, so Vincent, what you're saying is don't let perfection be the enemy of the good or even the good enough.
Absolutely correct. Do not let perfection be the enemy of the good or the good enough. But I would argue it's even more than just that. For you aren't alone in shepherding your records and fending off wolves. There's a whole interconnected web of relationships that you and we are a part of and that you can tap into to do your job more effectively.
That's right. In fact, one of the most important roles as an RMO is figuring out how to cultivate those relationships so they eventually become partnerships. In this way, you're sort of like a shepherd too, since the goal is herding the various stakeholders in your agency's records management program into coordinated action that keeps it running smoothly. But what are those relationships? Who's out there?
It's a very good question. Generally speaking, as RMO, there are two sets of relationships you need to think about, those that are internal and those that are external. The internal ones are those found within your own agency, including your agency's management, counsel's office, sometimes called Division of Legal Affairs or something like that, ITS, and individual unit staff.
Oh my, that's a lot of people to have to work with.
It can be, but as we'll see, they're all integral to making your program run well. And each of these comes with different skills and expertise you can rely upon.
Okay, that's the internal relationships. So what are the external relationships?
Basically, the one you form with the state archives. You're looking at it. We'll go into that more later, but first, let's focus on the relationships within your agency.
So the first and perhaps most important relationship you need to cultivate is with agency management. Basically, you need them to buy into what you're trying to do.
That makes sense. What would you say that buy-in looks like?
Well, several things really. It looks like them understanding that records management is critical to the agency's mission. It looks like them understanding your critical role as RMO. It also looks like their willingness to provide you with the tools you need to do your job effectively. After all, management has the authority to direct people to do the things you need them to do.
But how do you convince them of that, especially if you're not exactly sitting high up on the organizational ladder? As you well know, Arthur, that's one of the more intractable problems RMOs seem to face, what amounts to an unintentional, hate to say it, but maybe not so benign neglect from above.
Yeah, I know. This can be really hard, but it's also where ingenuity and perseverance come in. I'd look at it in terms of trying to sell your product. Demonstrate to them how important records management is to your organization.
How would you do that?
Well, it's never going to be perfect, and you may have to keep at it. We did say you'd need perseverance. But there are a few things you can try. The first thing is to schedule a meeting if you can. They're busy folks, so be flexible about this.
So, what do you say to them once you get your foot in the door?
Well, that's where you need to know your audience. Management cares about the bottom line, about legal liability, and about the smooth operation of the agency. So you need to explain to them that records management can impact all of these things, and in very critical ways. You have to think strategically.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and emphasize that the requirements for scheduling, retaining, disposing, and generally managing your records are set forth in law and regulation, and that there can be serious legal consequences for poor or improper records management practices. Heck, you can even do a little homework and find specific examples of organizations being fined or sued because of this if it'll help. You can also explain to them how a good records management program makes the agency's operations more efficient, saving labor, time, and money, and how it makes agency operations predictable.
That's pretty good advice. And come to think of it, it seems like there are other more tangible things you can also do to sell your product.
Oh, do tell.
One thing you can do is provide tours of record storage areas and file rooms, because records that are out of sight are records that are out of mind. If records are seen, records are real. If your management can see them, they become more real to them. Beyond your own storage areas, you can also arrange for a tour of the State Archives and State Records Center. We've always found that people are very impressed by these, and tours of the State Archives and State Records Center often pique people's interest in records.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many of our colleagues became archivists because they were impressed by a tour. But all kidding aside, we want to emphasize that buy-in is not a one-shot deal. It requires ongoing, continuous cultivation, since that's the way to build a genuine partnership with management.
And you can keep this process going by maintaining visibility and communication with them. Keep them informed about what's happening on the records management front, and never miss an opportunity to do so. Send them statistics on a regular basis, things like boxes transferred, boxes destroyed, storage space utilized, storage space freed up, etc. Get creative with your statistics, right? I mean, real ones, but get creative. How many pages were scanned, whatever. Produce them and share them. And in some cases, such as storage or inventory projects, taking before and after pictures might be a good thing.
Yeah, isn't there a saying that a picture's worth 1,000 words?
Yes, visuals can be pretty effective, and that's why we encourage our local government grant applicants, for example, to submit pictures with their applications. Get people to pose with the boxes for the pictures. If they object and they're not really serious about their objection, tell them they look great and take the picture anyway. In all seriousness, though, find ways to document your progress in some way, shape, or form, and in the process, give life to your records management work. Share it with your management.
Of course, we're not saying you should flood their inbox with emails about every detail of your progress, but don't let them forget that you and the records management program exist. And once you get established and form these habits of communicating, your job as RMO should be easier because hopefully you'll be able to enlist management support for things like staff training, policy development, and policy enforcement. They'll know who you are and what you do, and you'll be better positioned to do your job. Beyond that, and alluded to earlier, having good communication channels with your management allows for one other thing: the ability to say no, to critique and explain why a records management project won't work, and to help shape a bad idea into a good one. Without the ability to speak the truth, the program is bound to struggle.
The next critical relationship that you want to develop, and one that could also help with agency management, is the one with your agency's counsel. You should make it a point to introduce yourself and ideally get to know them.
Indeed, records management is as much a legal endeavor as it is maintaining intellectual or physical control of your records, and can involve serious legal issues like e-discovery or replevin, for instance. Counsel represents the agency and is tasked with limiting its legal liabilities and will be more aware than anyone of the legal risks involved in poor records management. So that means you can enlist them as allies in persuading the powers that be that records management generally, or some records management specific project, is important. They might even be able to provide specific examples of what can happen if an agency records management program isn't up to snuff, saving you some of that homework we mentioned in the last slide.
I might also point out, Arthur, that counsel's good for other records management kinds of things as well. For example, they're an important partner in reviewing proposed retention schedules to ensure that they are compliant with applicable laws and regulations. Of course, let's not forget the relationship you build with the agency's records access officer.
The who?
The Records Access Officer, or RAO, often found within counsel's office, this person handles FOIL requests that come into the agency. To satisfy a FOIL request, the RAO will lean on you as the RMO to help them find the correct records. To do that well, you need a sound records management program. The RAO should therefore be a natural ally as you advocate for support. Then there's ITS. Before we say too much about this, though, I want to mention a couple of things to think about first. First, we know that not every agency has an IT unit and relies upon the Office of Information Technology Services instead. Some agencies rely on both, depending upon the work that needs to be done. The point here is the RMO needs to form a relationship with whoever handles the agency's IT. Second, I think it's important to remind everyone that electronic records often exist in record-keeping systems and databases that are not unlike those used for paper records. It's just that their format and capabilities are different. So even though information exists in electronic format, it is still very much a record. and one that needs to be managed, scheduled, right, subject to retention schedules, and disposed of just like paper.
And that really is such an important point. A lot of people seem to make concrete distinctions between paper and electronic records where very few actually exist, and think that electronic records are somehow exempt from normal record keeping and management practices, like keeping digital records forever simply because they don't take up physical office space.
And while IT may create and support the systems that these electronic records are maintained in, and that's really important, of course, they may not even be aware of records management considerations, since the placement of the agency RMO is often completely separate from ITS.
In other words, IT is often siloed from the rest of the agency or may not even be part of the agency.
But that's all the more reason to try and work with them when such systems are developed or changes made to them. Because as RMO, your duty is to keep them informed of records management requirements that your agency must meet.
Yeah, the last thing you want is a system that doesn't have the ability to apply retention periods to records and winds up retaining everything forever, something that can happen if you're not working with IT when it's built or purchased.
Anyway, the moral of the story is this: bridge the gap between records management on the one hand and IT on the other. For our part, we've heard from RMOs that finding out who their ITS rep, finding out who that person is can be difficult and challenging. So or to ensure that ITS knows who you are, don't hesitate to ask your agency management for help with this.
And finally, the RMO needs to build and maintain a very strong partnership with agency units and staff.
Oh, absolutely. Unit staff are more familiar than anyone about their records. And as we're fond of saying at State Archives, no one knows an agency's records better than the people who work with them every day. That means you and your coworkers.
And because the units create and use records on a daily basis, they're the building blocks of your agency's records management program. In other words, that program's only as good as the cooperation you receive from unit staff.
But building a partnership with agency units can be a daunting task, particularly in a large agency. So you'll first need to get a lay of the land. And to do that, you must be a cartographer.
What? Wait, Vincent, I thought we said that they were shepherds.
I'm fine with mixing metaphors here. Does being one for an RMO mean that they can't be another, Arthur?
Well, I suppose not.
Precisely. So cartography. Cartography is the art of map making, and fortunately for you, a ready-made map should be available in the form of your agency's organizational chart, or charts if your agency is large enough. You need to know who the person in charge of each unit, division, and bureau is, and obtain their contact information. Understanding the layout of your agency, who is placed where, and equally important, what they and their units actually do, will help you help them manage the agency's records.
Well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I would add too that your agency's records aren't created in isolation in a unit by unit vacuum. They exist within the broader function and framework of your agency and should be viewed as pieces of a larger whole. As an RMO that's dealing with agency-wide records management functions, that's also where being a cartographer can be useful.
So, how do you build this partnership? One of the first things to do is work with individual units to name a records liaison.
What's that?
A records liaison is a point person, each and every unit with whom the RMO can communicate about the records management program at the unit level. Basically, the first line of defense in identifying records management issues or problems before they become real headaches. This person can be a unit head or supervisor, though they don't have to be. However, they need to intimately know their unit's records or have access to someone who does. Ideally, this person should also be deputized to work with the RMO and the state archives on retention scheduling and to fulfill other records management responsibilities as needed.
So what you're saying is basically the liaison is a de facto extension of the RMO.
That's right.
Well, that sounds like a great approach to spreading the burden so records management doesn't have to seem quite so overwhelming. But the idea of a liaison still seems to focus on the needs of individual units. Shouldn't the RMO consider the records management needs of the agency as a whole?
Absolutely. And that's why the liaison should be brought together into an agency-wide records management working group. You should probably try to include the records access officer in this group as well. How often you meet is up to you, but this provides an agency-wide forum for discussing records management questions, concerns, and solutions. It also provides space to plan training for staff.
And speaking of training, we should probably say a little more about that before moving on. Training is everything. Everyone shares the responsibility for making your records management program successful. And if staff are properly trained and supported, records management will seemingly take care of itself. So with this in mind, and of course with your management's approval, schedule training sessions with unit staff. This can take the form of formal meetings or even informal chats, and do this on a regular basis as periodic training reminds staff of records management processes and their retention obligations. You can also schedule days for unit staff to dispose of records that have fulfilled the required retention period.
And here's something else to consider. Since we all appreciate a good field trip from time to time, maybe make this part of one of your training sessions and take staff to where records are stored on site, just like we suggested you do with the agency's management. Seeing an organized storage facility can remind staff that records still exist and can be accessed even after they've been physically removed from the office.
Hey, that's a great point. But let me just end here by stressing again that regular and clear communication is key to good records management. Everyone understands its purpose and processes, and if potential problems can be spotted in advance and addressed before they become actual ones, then everyone will benefit. So now that we've talked about internal partnerships, it's time to talk about external ones, specifically your partnership with the state archives. I say a partnership because the RMO is, in a very real sense, the eyes, ears, and arms of the archives. We're very much all on the same team and have the same goals in mind, ensuring the records successfully make it through their life cycle in a well-managed way and end up where they need to be. But to build a relationship with the state archives, it's helpful to understand who we are and what we do.
So, who are we? The State Archives is the repository for maintaining New York State government records that have been determined to possess long term, enduring historical value. But we do a lot more than that. For one thing, we provide technical guidance, education, and training through publications, our website, and through webinars like this one.
We also offer one-on-one or on-site training for agency staff.
That's right. As an RMO, you can request training for yourself and your agency staff. And the line is always open to the archives about specific or general records management questions you may have. And just so you know that we've got your back, if you're having difficulty getting buy-in or even the attention of your agency's management, we're happy to step into the breach and help facilitate communication or even speak with them alongside you. Sometimes hearing these things directly from us can be enough to convince them of the importance of what you're doing.
That's very true. You might be surprised to hear, or not, that RMOs sometimes contact us about longstanding or proposed agency policies that don't necessarily reflect an appreciation for sound records management, kind of like what we mentioned earlier about the potential for scanning projects. This is the kind of situation where we can make a meaningful intervention to support you in your role as RMO. So, Vincent, what else do we do to help the RMO?
You know how agencies can't dispose of records without a retention schedule?
Yep.
Well, because of this, one of our primary records management functions is retention scheduling, which determines how long to keep records and authorizes their final disposition. There's a separate webinar that deals with this process, so we won't get into it here, but it amounts to an important working relationship since archive staff and you, the RMO, work together to develop retention and disposition plans that meet your needs while being fiscally and legally compliant.
And of course, being the state archives also means that we acquire and manage state archival records.
Go on.
Well, you see, a very small percentage of agency records will have some longer term value beyond the needs of the state, and it's up to the state archives to determine which ones these are. This is done through the process of appraisal, which is often done in tandem with scheduling activity. Appraisal also relies heavily on the input of the RMO and agency staff most knowledgeable about the records. I should also mention that the agency is required to transfer records determined to be archival to the state archives, which then takes legal custody over them. Once we acquire these records, we take great care to manage them over time. However, you or other agency staff are free to access them whenever you like or have need to.
And for records that aren't archival, which are the vast majority, we run the State Record Center, which we'll talk more about shortly. But the main thing to keep in mind is that the State Archives is here to support you and help you improve your records management program. You are not alone.
Okay, so on the previous slide, we spoke briefly about scheduling and appraisal of records as functions of the state archives. Now we'd like to discuss what that process can look like and how it can build a stronger partnership between you and us.
We should probably point out here that scheduling and appraisal is handled by the Scheduling and State Agency Services Unit of the Archives.
Right, we probably should mention that.
And full disclosure, in case it wasn't crystal clear, that's the unit Arthur and I are in.
Anyway, to properly schedule and evaluate records, it's critical to learn as much about them as possible, such as their volume, formats, age and condition, where they're stored, etc., etc. We also need to understand their significance to your agency, how they're used and for what purpose, and if there are other records that capture the same information. And to be able to do that, we need your help.
Now, you may be thinking that you don't have this kind of knowledge of specific record series or functions within the various units of your agency. But remember, that's okay. Wearing as many records management hats as you do, we don't expect you to. Instead, your role as RMO is to coordinate and facilitate contact between archive staff, that's us, and agency unit staff and/or liaisons whose records are being scheduled and who are most familiar with them.
So basically what you're saying is that the RMO is a liaison between the archives and agency units.
Precisely. And once contact is made, archive staff can either raise questions or concerns about submitted schedules directly to agency staff or through you as an intermediary. But as RMO, you always need to be involved in those conversations.
Oh, and let me add here that these conversations can usually be conducted remotely by phone, email, or Microsoft Teams or WebEx. On the other hand, any appraisal work to determine if records are archivable should be done in person whenever possible, since a much more thorough analysis of the records is usually required. And here too, the RMO is critical in facilitating communication with agency staff, whose knowledge and expertise will likely provide insight into the potential long-term value of their records. This is a tool that we can and often have benefited from. So, oh, Vincent, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to add something?
Yes, I just wanted to strike a slightly more process-oriented note and say that for those records that have been scheduled as archival, once the retention period is almost up, you should contact our accessioning unit and they'll work out the details of transfer with you, including what paperwork you'll need to complete. Instructions for how to transfer records can be found on our website, the link to which is at the end of this presentation. The second external partnership you'll need to build is with the State Records Center, which we briefly mentioned a few slides back. The Record Center is part of the State Archives and located on the Harriman campus.
Also known as the State Office Campus.
Right, also known as the State Office Campus. Good enthusiasm, Arthur. Keep in mind that the Record Center is not to be confused with the archives itself, as often happens. The State Archives is located in the Cultural Education Center, or CEC, and is the repository for records determined to possess enduring historical value. The Record Center, on the other hand, is a storage facility for agency inactive records, in effect, an extension of agency storage space.
And that's why the Record Center is likely going to be an important component of your agency's records management program. Most agencies have more records than they have resources to handle them. To be a good shepherd, you need to use whatever tools you have at your disposal to make up for these shortfalls and protect against the wolves that could otherwise threaten your records. When you're short on space or unable to physically care for them, the Record Center is definitely one of those tools.
That's right. So for a small per box or item fee, you can transfer your inactive records to the Record Center, where they'll be well taken care of for the duration of their retention period.
Hey, sort of like a spa for inactive records.
You could look at it that way, I suppose. At any rate, records stored there remain in your agency's legal custody, even though they're physically in the Record Center's possession, and you can ask for them back at any time. Access to the records is also limited to you as agency RMO and whomever else you designate.
And I wanted to point out too that only scheduled records are accepted there. If you try to pull the pop in with a truck full of unscheduled records, they're going to turn you away. They really will. But even scheduled records can be transferred only at certain times. So to prevent being turned away in this case too, it's best to get in touch with them ahead of time and let them know you have records you want to send them. They'll be happy to walk you through the process.
Yes, all good points. And I'm the person who guards the front door and does that. So if you want to send stuff and you're unsure, get in touch. But another useful amenity that we offer is free confidential shredding for all New York State agencies. If you are interested in more information about the Record Center, we offer a separate webinar about it, or you can visit our website. One final point to add to this before moving on. Earlier, we mentioned agencies taking field trips to record storage spaces. And there's no better place to see this kind of thing than at the State Record Center, where over 200,000 cubic feet of inactive records are stored. You know, we've talked quite a lot today, but not so much about the technical details of records management or how to do every particular task that's expected of an RMO. Instead, we wanted to give you a framework for understanding the role in such a way that you can imagine actually doing it. We spoke of the RMO as a shepherd, of records as your flock, and of your role in assembling your records management partners with a goal of building and maintaining a solid records management program. We hope that what we've discussed here today can serve you as a useful roadmap for action. But before we go, we'd like to offer a few more things for you to consider that could make the job easier, to smooth out the bumps in your journey and polish your shepherding staff, as it were.
First off, you should set attainable goals for yourself and your records management program. You should have a reasonable time frame for your goals, say 3 to 5 years, but work in smaller incremental steps. When you start a project, break it down into manageable bites. Set out your priorities, and less is definitely more here, and try not to start too many projects at once. This will help you from being overwhelmed. It'll also make it easier for you to keep track of your progress and demonstrate that progress to others, which is a great way to boost morale and maintain momentum.
And it'll also allow you to pick up where you left off more easily if the project gets interrupted by some new and pressing task or temporarily stalls out for whatever reason.
Now, come on, Vincent. When does state government work ever get interrupted by a new or pressing task?
Oh, you know what? You're right, Arthur. That never happens. Please continue.
Seriously, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Records management doesn't happen overnight. Focus on one activity or spread the project out over time. For example, if you're scheduling a unit's records and there's one series that's particularly complex or problematic, you might consider putting it aside for the time being so as not to hold up the work of scheduling the rest of the unit's records. You can always come back to it later.
I would say that's a wise and prudent plan. Speaking of plans, make sure you develop a records management plan and stick to it. And make sure everybody else does too. Records management isn't something that should be done ad hoc.
But it is an ongoing learning experience. And as RMO, you should always be willing to learn. You don't need an advanced degree in information science to do your job, but watching the webinars we put online and reading our publications and other online materials will start you well on your way. If you really take to this, get involved in professional organizations. It can also be helpful to look for opportunities for growth within your agency.
So keep your eye out for training being offered.
Yeah, this can be especially important for all things IT related. They might offer training on Microsoft Excel or perhaps an overview of an agency's data systems. If it seems like something that might be useful, get involved, take the class.
And finally, be flexible. Remember, not every RMO is starting from the same place or dealt the same hand. Some inherit well-run records management programs, and all they need to do is keep them running.
Which, by the way, also takes work and motivation.
That's very true, though you'll probably have an easier time with it since you can stick to what you already know works pretty well. Other RMOs are beginning from scratch or inheriting a challenged program. In some agencies, the staff and management are very supportive and get it, while in others, they don't.
And we're also living through a long transition from paper to digital records. And though it'll likely never be complete, it will have a huge impact on the way we manage records, which can't be ignored. So as this transition continues, you'll have to find ways to deal with it and adapt to it.
Yes, and you may even face changes and disruptions in more familiar ways, like your agency moving to a new location or merging with another agency. But all this is to say that you have to work with what you've got and you need to determine what works best for you in your particular situation. Let's face it, agencies, again, I'm just stressing this, agencies have different cultures and agencies are organized in different ways. These aren't easy to change, so you'll have to find ways to work through them instead.
Well, we're hopeful that by this point you're feeling better about the situation you're in. We know that the duties and responsibilities of being an RMO can be challenging and sometimes daunting, but the framework we've laid out today will hopefully give you the tools to build a support system to make your job easier. What we've done is give you permission to delegate responsibility to others because at the end of the day, one person can't do it all, and records management is everyone's responsibility. The RMO is simply the coordinator of this.
And that's the real challenge, introducing yourself to your potential agency partners and cultivating a relationship with them. But if you view everything you do as RMO as an opportunity to build these partnerships, everything you say, everything you do, and you're persistent and don't let yourself get discouraged, you'll improve your agency's records management program significantly. The bottom line is this: don't fret over it. Remember, you always have us here at the State Archives to help you. go to our website, especially the records management section, and see what's there. Email us, call us, do whatever you need to do to get answers, because after all, you are the RMO. Questions?
We have a question here from Melissa, Vincent, and Arthur. You mentioned issues to be considered prior to scanning records. Can you elaborate?
One second while I resize this window, everybody. So, I mean, it's a great question. And it's one we're dealing with a number of agencies right now. The first question I would ask, and this is, thrown at our local government, the people we work with in local government too, when they apply for grants. Like, why are you scanning the records? What's your reason? People often don't stop and think, why am I mean, there's often not, in fairness to all of us, right? There's not a lot of time to stop and actually think about anything. But when you're going to scan and you start to look at the price tag, especially if you're going to have a vendor do it, or you're going to devote staff resources to doing it, you have to ask, why are you doing this? Are you trying to improve access, right? If you have records that are based in Albany, but everybody out in the regional offices needs to access them, right? And they need to be accessible, right? There might be a compelling reason to scan them. But then you have to ask yourself, I don't want to say a second order question, but another really important question: how often do they need to be accessed? Maybe once in a great while, someone in the regional office needs to take a look at them. Maybe they don't. Is it worth scanning all of them, right? That's what you always have to ask yourself. Why am I doing this, and is it worth doing it? Another reason could be that, these are records that are regularly accessed, the physical records in this case. They're falling apart because everybody's handling them. Maybe then it makes sense to scan them to preserve them and also provide access, right? There's something to be said for sort of centralized storage on your local area network or in software, right, up in the cloud in the ether. No, it's not really, but and then have centralized storage but decentralized access. But you have to weigh out, why are we doing this, and is it really worth it? And then sort of do a cost benefit analysis. How much will it actually cost the agency to do this in terms of money and in terms of resources? How many staff are you willing to, if you're going to do it in-house, Melissa, how many people are you willing to dedicate to do it? Which means if they're doing that, there's an opportunity cost. They're not doing something else. Is it worth it? These are things that only you can answer, but these are kinds of questions that you have to sort of weigh out and see what the consensus position is. So that way, as records management officer, you're not left hanging in the breeze for making a decision that no one else is buying into. I don't know if that answers your question. I hope it does.
And there's also issues of, I would say that, if you're having issues with like storage space and access, and if you, maybe your records are in somewhat of disarray, or, there are other issues with it, that, there may be other ways of dealing with that first, like through weeding or through other methods that could get down the volume of paper records that you have, that could also deal with those issues of access and space before committing to scanning, as opposed to, using scanning to sort of just scan all your records and then just destroy all the paper. And so like you freed up all the space for the paper, but then you've, like, like we said, you've transferred a lot of those problems, records management problems that were inherent within the paper that weren't dealt with, onto the digital copies. So now you have that problem to deal with. So I would say, like, before committing to a scanning project, like Vincent said, see what you're trying to accomplish, and if that can be accomplished through other means first, other, more standard records management means first.
Okay, Melissa just replied, that helps, thank you. Storage space and remote access are big problems for us. Okay, I have a question here from Lyle. How long does it take for a transfer list to be approved by records?
Hi, Lyle. It's Vincent. And judging by other people in the audience, this is a question that not only you have. So this is what I would say to you. It truly depends on a few things. One, how many transfer lists are we dealing with at any given time? That's the first question. We typically deal with them in the order in which they're received. But sometimes people have, there's a genuine issue that moves people up in the queue. Not going to lie about it. They're moving an office. There's some sort of records management disaster. Records are at risk. Those kind of things do happen. But generally, depends on the order in which they're received and the complexity. I often, as you know, as many of you on this call know from working with me, will bounce back questions to you that are of a more substantial nature, right? I think everyone has to wrap their minds around this. Up until a couple of years ago, transferring records to the record center was seen as a purely logistical task, right? You list off what's going to be sent, and as long as there was no more than 40 boxes on there and all the retention schedules were the same, the RDAs were the same, nobody questioned it, right? And that's not criticism. That's simply to say that's not how the place was structured or designed, and no one was paid to do that work. That has changed because we realize somebody really needs to do that work. That someone is me, how I've gotten to know so many of you. And if I'm, coming at you guys with questions about like what's going on, can you put me in touch with the unit? The sooner I can get in touch with the unit to get to work on it, and the more you can lean on the unit to sort of be responsive, the better positioned will be to get your transfers moved along. I would say that's the best way, but they're not just going to be waved through, and there's going to be delays. There's just a lot of stuff coming in, and we can only move so fast. So my apologies for sometimes the long turnaround time, but it's just the nature of the beast here.
Okay, see if we have any more questions. Lyle says thank you.
And to Ulysses, there is no short answer. It will vary.
All right. Also want to remind people that this session, as with all of our webinars, is being recorded and will be available within a few days, either accessible from our website or our YouTube page. We got all kinds of stuff there that may be of interest to you, as well as state agencies, interested in both state agencies and local governments. So some things do cross over. Yeah, so we have about 8 minutes left if anybody has any questions. And of course, I think most of you are familiar with both Vincent and Arthur. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and put the link into the YouTube page in here for Rocky. And
That's for our channel, right, Rich?
yes, our YouTube channel.
Okay, because this won't be up. It'll take a couple days to get this up to YouTube, right?
Yeah, it usually takes, well, we put it up on YouTube and then we link it to our website.
Ah.
But I will definitely, yeah, here you go. I'm going to put this, I'll put both links in here.
Yes, a big thank you to our producer, Richard Sloma, the voice of the State Archives.
I have a face for radio, so this helps. Yeah, so we got both, for anybody who's been to our website, we have a, when you go to the training side, workshops, we have a workshop catalog, and we have all of our different offerings listed there. If there is a recording of a webinar for it, and there usually is, you can link that way, or you can certainly just go to our YouTube channel. There's all kinds of good stuff there. I have a question from Ulysses. Do we attach the transfer list to the palette when transferring over to the archives?
Good question. People have done that. You don't have to. When you've sent it to me for approval, I approve it, and then RMOs work out the logistics with Kevin Costigan. We know it's coming in. Sometimes we just do a double check if you've built up records over a long period of time and are haven't sent stuff in a while that's already been approved, but you don't have to attach it to the palette. What I would encourage you to do and to consider, and some agencies are really good about this. Lyle, you guys are really good about this. You put inside the container some sort of inventory of what's in there, explaining what's in there, what retention schedule, what transfer list. Don't attach it to the lid because lids blow away. Lids I don't want to say they're interchangeable, but basically. But put it in there with the records so that way if we ever are called upon to have to do any work with those records or check on something, we have a, sort of a primer to what's in the box at a glance, but also just as important, you do too if you ever have to come and look at them or call the box back. So that is something you can do. Put it inside the box. But on the outside of the pallet, no, you don't need to do that. Good question.
Yes, and Lyle just commented, keep a copy in the box right on top.
Yep.
And we've got about 5 minutes left, but also for those folks who may not know, I'm going to go ahead and just post the way to contact our state agency services staff. Okay, have a question from Adrienne. How should we handle FOIL or other records requests for records that transfer to the archives? Should we direct the request to archives or ask archives for the records for us to inspect?
So as one who doesn't typically work with FOIL, at least not in the way that I think you might be asking, I would say this: that are the records records that are being stored at the record center on your behalf as the agency, right? So if you send over records and there's still time left on its retention period, those records are still yours as the agency. So if you receive a FOIL request for something that's in those boxes, you would call the box back and satisfy the FOIL request. However, if the records have been formally transferred to archives, right? They've been appraised as archival. There's a retention schedule that says for final disposition, transfer to archives. That means that once the retention period is over, they fall into the legal custody of the state archives. We are responsive, and staff are trained to do that. So I don't do that, but other staff do that, and that's like one of their main responsibilities. So they're held to the same standards of FOIL as you are in the agencies. But so long as that record is considered inactive and has not satisfied its retention period, we might physically have them at the record center, but they're not ours. They're still yours and your legal custody. So you need to be the one that responds, and you would just call the box back. Good question.
Okay. You're welcome, Adrienne. All right, well, we're down to about 2 or 3 minutes. I'm also going to post in our email address, which is also listed on the page here. If you don't have a specific person you're looking for, you can always email us at recmanagement or recmgmt@niced.gov, and that mailbox will patch you through to the appropriate person within our scheduling and state agency services to help you with any of your records management questions or training needs.
I feel like what we need is the ability for the people on this list to talk to one another. Maybe at the end of the year, Rich and Arthur, we could schedule a roast where they get to come and roast us, like about right, like just the airing of grievances. We'll have a little Festivus festival at the end of the year where you guys can object to how long it takes about transfer lists or about incomplete information. But seriously, you guys can as you can reach out anytime. Email is best, but if you have a question or something's pressing, reach out. We do try and juggle all of you, and we know it can be tedious. I know that I can be tedious with my questions, but there's a reason for it, because we don't want to be saddled at the record center with space. There's space limitations. Obviously, it's much larger than anybody's office, but there are limits, and we need to manage that space very carefully. And we have records that are sent in on a whim by an agency, and something that has a 6-year retention is being sent in for 10 or 20 or longer years. We have a responsibility to sort of stop you and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? And sometimes that leads to new retention schedules. Agency needs change, but they don't realize they have to update the retention schedule. That's fine. talk to us. We can work with you to do that. The more we talk, the better we will be.
Great. And with that, we thank everybody for participating in this session. And the recording should be available within a day or two. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.